Hello everybody, Blue Dooley, and we're working on the engine again today. Got to clean the top of the head up a little bit, and then we're going to start off by changing out all the valve springs and the valve stem seals. That's kind of how we're starting the day out. We're going to pull that oil pickup tube off the engine and then install all the new tappets, get the camshaft installed. Actually, we'll get the gear case installed, then get the camshaft installed. Start putting the engine back together so we can eventually get it hooked up to that 6-speed, because I would really like to drive my truck again. I'm kind of tired of driving the wife's Jeep, so let's get started. I have a 12 valve tool, which you need. It is a special tool you will need to do this job, and I don't think it was terribly expensive. If you do it a lot, it'll save you time anyways. So let's get some gloves on, and I think we'll go to the old time-lapsey and time-lapse doing this, because it shouldn't be terribly hard. I don't mention it anywhere in the video, but the head is sitting on a really thick piece of cardboard. If you do put the head on a workbench, if you still have the injectors in it, the injector nozzle sticks out of the bottom of the head a little bit, so you'll need to put it on something soft or hold it up a little bit off the workbench so you're not mangling the tips of the injectors. Double checking how to get the valve spring retainers off, because they did get a little stuck, and if you noticed, it's actually picking the head up. Alright, I did have a little bit of a struggle getting these valves to release. The tool just pressed the valve, it pressed everything down and actually lifted the heads on the valves. So I had to loosen it up a little bit, give it a pretty decent tap to knock these retainers loose out of the retainer cup so I could actually get the springs off. We are going to competition style valve springs. That's the stock one. This is an industrial injection, rated at 150 pounds for competition valve spring. The Hamilton cams ones were out of stock everywhere. So the only stiffer springs I could find were the industrial injection ones. So now that I got that cleaned off, we got a bag full of all the valve stem seals. So we'll go through, as we're doing these, we'll change these out as well. It's a pretty straightforward process. Like I said, of course, being me, it would have to be just a little bit difficult. But nothing terribly fancy about these. They just slip right on, fit nice and snug. And definitely fit on there pretty snug, so we'll have to maybe get a little socket over them or something to maybe get those pressed on a little better. Maybe we'll clean up the there we go. Let's give these a little bit of a rough tap. There we go. Probably don't need this big of a hammer, but I have a dead blow hammer I should probably be using instead of a baby sledge. Those look like they are sitting down where they need to be. So let's go ahead and switch back to time lapse and get this button done. After I switched to the dead blow hammer and figured out I needed to give all these valves a little knock to get the retaining clips loose,
It didn't actually take too long to get all the valves and valve seals changed out. I know a lot of people probably will give me flack about putting an aftermarket camshaft in such a relatively low horsepower application. There's a couple of reasons for running the camshaft I am running. It's not a street or a high horsepower cam. It's more for towing and keeping exhaust temps down and improving fuel economy a little bit. The stock 12 valve with the manual transmission came with the highest horsepower rating at 215 horsepower at the crankshaft, which is, by today's standards, anemic. So the last dyno I ran the truck at, it was putting 450 horsepower down at the rear wheels. I want the engine to breathe a little better because I don't want to have to drive the truck staring at the EGT gauge all the time. I'll be able to hook up to whatever I want to tow, especially with the Allison 6-speed and this camshaft, set the cruise at whatever I want to go at, and pull pretty much any grade and not have to worry about the engine overheating, the exhaust temps getting too hot. I'm going for more horsepower, but I'm also mainly going for reliability. And Hamilton doesn't actually recommend this heavy of a valve spring, but as I mentioned at the beginning of earlier in the video, everything else was sold out. The other nice thing about this stiff of a valve spring is when I put an exhaust brake on the truck, I don't have to worry about the exhaust brake creating so much back pressure it's floating the exhaust valves open, which can happen with the stock valve springs on the 12 valve. So a few extra steps to make sure that whatever I do past this to the truck, the engine will be fine, the transmission will hold it, and I don't have to worry. So mainly kind of a peace of mind. You can see in the photo there's the ARP head stud kit. I've had that kit for quite a while and just finally I'm getting around to installing it. So since I had to pull the engine and transmission out to do everything I wanted, it was time to put the head studs in it, new head gasket, and just put a little more reliability in the truck. The head studs probably aren't needed for the horsepower rating I'm going at for, but it's a little bit of a peace of mind in case later down the road you decide to up the horsepower substantially. I don't have to worry about the valves, the cam, or the head gasket, or the head bolts. It'll just be ready to go for any future upgrades when I get to them. So we're gonna wrap this up here pretty quick. I'm on the last set of valves right now. And again, the dead blow hammer directly on the tool above the valves knocked them loose pretty quick. So if you do find yourself with the valves sticking like I did, I don't know if that's the recommended way to get them loose, but it worked. And again, with the dead blow hammer, you're not gonna really tear things up. Got all the valve springs and valve stem seals changed out. The 150-pound valve springs from Industrial Injection are a little bit fatter than the stock springs. So on the tool here, where it fits between the springs, that'll get a little snug. And I actually had to physically kind of bring the springs together to get them over the valve stems. So just something to kind of keep an eye on. That's the XDP valve spring tool. You can probably find one at Napa for cheaper, but that was on the site where I got all the rest of the parts. So what we're going to do now is I need to get the head picked up so I can clean all the gunk off of it and clean up the mating surface where it sits on the head. We're going to drop that oil pickup tube off and do the tappets next. So hang on, I'm going to do all that off camera because it's just cleaning. It's boring.
the next order of business is fishing the tappets up into the block. I'll give them a good coating of assembly lube. We're going to use a magnet and actually just come straight through the push rod hole. Of course, it's a magnet, so it's going to stick to every part of the engine I don't want it to. I don't know if you can see out the bottom of the block or not. Hopefully that magnet's strong enough to pull those in there. Alright. Tappet fishing. Of course. Might not actually work as well as I'd hoped it would. Magnet might not be fucking strong enough to hold these in place to do this. Of course, we dropped that one in the shit, so maybe we'll have to push them up through the bottom. Which I suppose isn't actually a terrible thing to have to do. Might stay on the magnet better. Okay. Well, this is going to be tedious no matter which way I do it, so we'll skip the tedium. Apparently just drops the son of a bitch every time I turn around. So the magnet trick didn't work. My magnet isn't strong enough. So what I have is what's known as a pickle fork. But I jammed a piece of hose on the end, and that hose actually fits in the top of the tappet pretty snugly, actually. So I just feed it through the top here, and then stick it on the end of the hose and pull it up after I put a little lube on it. So that's how we're doing that now. And then zip tying them up in place again. Again, it's kind of a little tedious, and I don't see how the special tool would make this any easier. Might be slightly less frustrating, but I doubt it. However, it is really easy to pull them straight up into the block with that oil pickup tube out of the way. So that might save you a little headache down the road. I don't know. So I'm going to get the rest of these in there and then get that front gear assembly on so we can get the camshaft in and be that much closer to being done. Got the gear case back on the engine. My Haynes manual doesn't actually list the torque spec for any of the 10mm bolts that are hold the case on. A quick search online said that the basic rule of thumb on this engine is any 10mm hardware is 18 foot-pounds So I just went with pretty darn snug. Then the pump itself is 50 foot-pounds, and I'm going to have to double check on the cam retainer bolts after I get the camshaft in, what those need to be bolted down to. So the oil pickup tube I'm going to put in, and just, again, snug, nothing crazy. Don't go tighten it till it breaks and then back it off a quarter turn, which is my usual running gag when people ask me how tight things need to be. Yeah. And don't forget, this case is aluminum, so snug and leave it alone. Got a new camshaft bushing in because that one is too thick and neither the old camshaft or the new camshaft will fit in it. But this one does fit over the camshaft, so I'm going to tap that one out, knock this one in, and finally we can get started putting the engine back together. So this thing's been holding us up for 2 weeks now, but that's where we're at. Got the camshaft in. If you've got a buddy that can help you and you got that oil tube out of the way, someone can actually reach in under the block and kind of help guide the camshaft through the block all the way into place. You do want to make sure you line your timing marks up. And then the 2 bolts for the retainer are 18 foot-pounds. All of the gear case bolts, also 18 foot-pounds of torque. Now I can cut all of my zip ties off the tappets and then get that tappet cover put back on the engine. And then we'll get the pump on. So I'm not going to show cutting zip ties or getting that tappet cover on. It's pretty straightforward. We'll come back when we get the pump mounted and we'll talk about torquing it down and getting it timed. I covered up all the holes on the injection pump so I can power wash it. Diesel fuel pumps really easy. Water does not pump as good as diesel fuel, so if you get water in the pump you might booger something up. So that's getting power washed. The tappet cover on my engine, you can kind of see right here, there's a little bit of glue residue I didn't quite get off, but since it's behind the pump, nobody's going to see it. Had a cover on it and kind of a foam, and it was already starting to peel off a little bit, so I just yanked it the rest of the way off. My engine was actually tan underneath, so I sprayed some engine enamel on it. Not super great, and I wasn't too worried like around here because the pump's going to be blocking it anyways. So I'll finish painting the engine after I get a few more things bolted to it. But that's where we're at. Going to power wash the pump and then we'll get it installed. Slowly getting her back together. You will need a big 30mm socket for the injection pump nut. I took it off with an impact and a standard socket, but the standard socket's a little too loose, so I went and got the proper socket now, since my socket only went up to 28mm. But the ejection pump is on, torque down. This nut, I found some conflicting reports. Well, not really conflicting. I found some different torque specs for this. Everything from 44 foot-pounds to 175 foot-pounds. So I went with 175. And that got her really snug because I don't want that slipping at all. I need to take the pin out and unpin the pump. I got the vacuum pump installed and I've kind of hit it with a little bit of low gloss and engine enamel paint. So it's not going to be a show truck by any means, but it'll at least look presentable if I do take it to a truck show or something. The oil pickup tube has been reinstalled. I also have the water pump reinstalled. I'm going to get the oil pan cleaned up and get the gasket on it and get the oil pan on next. So then the bottom end will be pretty much done. I'm going to leave this gear cover off. That way when I get the head on, the push rod's in place, and the rocker's all installed, I can kind of bar the engine over and watch all my gears and stuff and just make sure everything is spinning freely and not hung up. But yeah, everything I've seen said you really kind of need to tighten the shit out of that nut so it doesn't spin on that shaft. And also, the general consensus is clean the shaft and the gear with brake clean really, really well, because you don't want any grime in there to cause that to shift at all. So we'll catch back to you after we get a little more work done. Okay, got the head and the block cleaned up. New head gasket in place. I haven't torqued anything down because the ARP head stud kit I have, I think I still need to machine these down a little bit, but I need to double check because I think I read somewhere a while ago that you didn't have to. So I need to double check on that and then torque everything down, and the engine will be pretty much back together. I'll get everything torqued down, then I'll spin the motor by hand a couple of times just to make sure nothing's binding or any of that kind of stuff. So that's what we're going to call this video. As always, if you enjoy the content and you definitely want to be sure to see how this turns out, be sure to subscribe and click like, and we'll catch you in the next video.